Hi and welcome to this webinar or video, depending on when you're watching it, called Estimating 201. Estimating 201 is a follow-up to our previous webinar video called Estimating 101, which was the basics. If you haven't seen the basics one and you are at sort of the entry level of estimating, you should watch Estimating 101 first. There we go through things like the estimating screen, all the different buttons and what they do, how to print reports, how to enter client notes, and how to build a basic price for a job. So if you're at that level, make sure you check out Estimating 101 before watching this one. But in this webinar, we're going to go through some of the more advanced features of LMN's estimating. So how to calculate production rates, the fastest ways to build options on a job, how to do things like importing work that you've already estimated from other jobs into current jobs. There's a lot of tips and tricks to make estimating faster and more productive for you. So this webinar is designed for people that are already comfortable and familiar with building LMN estimates. If you're just looking for faster, more efficient ways to price work, or you're looking for some best practices for options and how to calculate labor times and that sort of thing, this is probably the webinar for you. If you're at the entry level and you really haven't built many estimates before, definitely recommend watching Estimating 101 and getting used to estimating's basic functions before you dive too deep into these functions. Let's start with labor or production rate. So there's all kinds of factors that go into estimating time on a job, which couldn't possibly just be turnkey figured out by a piece of software. However, we can certainly set the table so that it's easier for our estimators to come up with factors to consider when they're estimating labor. Let's take a look now, and we'll start with the easiest one. So let's say I'm here in a service estimate, and I'm looking at a mowing job, and I'd like to figure out how long it would take to mow this property. The easiest way to set up a calculator that'll convert a measurement to a labor time would be over here in LMN's production rates. So before I get into estimating and actually calculating time, it's a good idea to take a look at some of these production rates and set some up for your estimators to make it easy. Let's look at what one looks like. Here's my list of production rate calculators. And again, I got here by going item catalog and production rates. Here I can set up basically calculators to take things like square feet or a number of units or linear feet or any measurement at all and convert that into a time in man hours. A really simple example is mowing, so let's start there. I'm going to open this mowing residential calculator. Now in that calculator, I've gone here and I've hit new and I've added some different tasks. Mowing with a 36-inch deck, mowing with a 30-inch deck, mowing with a 21-inch deck, trimming and blowing. Now each of these tasks are measured in square feet or linear feet or whatever you want to measure them in. And then over here I've specified an installation rate. So if you look at this, what I'm saying is with a 36-inch deck, we can mow 58,000 square feet per man hour. With a 30-inch deck, we can mow 32,000 square feet a man hour, and so on and so on. Now, obviously, I'm not going to use all these decks on any job specifically, but they're all available as options for me so that when my estimators are estimating, they can basically pick the deck size, more or less, enter the square footage that's going to be cut by that mower, and that'll convert that into a number of man hours. Let's take a look on an estimate now to see what that looks like. So here we are back in our service estimate, and I've got this task called mowing, and inside mowing, I've got a maintenance crew and a maintenance trailer. Now to use a production rate calculator, I'm going to slide my mouse over here, and anytime there's a labor item on an estimate, you're going to see this red calculator button. We're going to click that. Now it's asking me to pick the production rate calculator that I want to use. So if I was paving a driveway, I could use our paving driveway calculator. But in this case, we're mowing, and we're going to assume it's a residential lawn. So I'm going to click Mowing Residential. There again comes those tasks that we set up in our production rate calculator. So here, my estimator is going to basically pick the size of deck that we would be using on that job. So if it was a 36-inch deck, I'm going to enter the square feet of this property that I would need to cut. Let's say, for example, it's 75,000 square feet. That'll work out then down here, a 1.29 hours. And if you want to round this up, of course, you can set a rounding factor to whatever you want. It'll round it up to the nearest unit. And what it's done now is calculate a labor factor for this. I could also add, if I wanted to, how much time it might take us to do trimming. So if there was, for example, 150 linear foot of trimming, we'd add that to the estimate. And then blowing, let's say we're going to blow off the driveway and walkway areas. There's sort of 1,500 square feet of that, and it adds a little bit more time for blowing. So now I've got this estimate. I'm going to go down here and click Update Estimate. And now it's changed that estimate to be the right number of man hours for all that mowing and blowing, etc. If I wanted, I could set up different production rate calculators for commercial sites. So again, I'll hit the calculator, and I've already done this. I've created some calculators called mowing residential, which we just looked at, and also mowing commercial. The mowing commercial would have bigger decks and perhaps be measured in acres instead of square feet. Same principle applies though. If I was using a 48-inch deck on a site that was 2.5 acres, it's going to tell me it's going to take 0.93 man hours to cut it. So these are fast and handy ways of helping your estimators convert a measurement, and in this case we looked at square feet or acres, into amount of time it would take to cut it. We can also use this for things like construction estimates. So if I was to look at this construction estimate, it's a front yard and we're building a driveway here. I go to edit the driveway and I'm going to click this production rate calculator again. And this time you're going to see an example of a paver driveway. Maybe before I show you how to use it in the estimate, we'll take a look at the production rate calculator behind the scenes and how I set it up. So if we go to production rate calculator here, let's look at our paver driveway, and I've got two options here, one by hand and one with equipment. Of course, if we had equipment, we're going to excavate and put the base in a lot faster, which is why I have the two. So let's look at paver driveway with equipment. And what you can see here is I've broken down the paver driveway into steps: excavation, install and compact the base, edge installation, install pavers, and finish the work. Now, when we get to the actual estimate, it's going to combine all these steps into one simple labor hours. But if you like to estimate this way, i.e. breaking it down by steps, here's how you do it. You also wouldn't have to get this detailed. If you just wanted to create one line that said install driveway and did square feet to hours, you could do that as well. This is an example of a more detailed approach to estimating driveways. So now I'm going to walk through this. I've set it up, excavate area, and we can do 100 square feet per man hour. Installing and compacting base, we can do 35 square feet per man hour. Edge installation, we can install 40 feet of edge per man hour. Installing pavers, 25 man hour. And finish work, which is just the sweeping the sand and maybe the final power washing, 200 square feet a man hour. Now, it's really important to remember when you're putting these installation rates in that all these are per man hour, not per crew hour. So for example, if a 3-person crew could install 100 square feet of base per hour, then that's going to be about 35 square feet per man hour. So remember, again, this is by man hour, not by crew hour. Once you've got these set up though, you're all set for estimating. We'll jump back to the estimate we were looking at. I'm going to go back here. And now, in order to calculate the labor time on this estimate, we're going to pick that paver driveway with equipment. And up here comes those stages, and it's asking me for a measurement in square feet. So I'm going to say, let's say it's a 1,200 square foot driveway. I'm going to excavate a little bit bigger. We're going to install 1,200 square feet of base. We're going to measure, obviously, the edge. And let's say there's 90 linear feet of edge. We've got 1,200 square feet of pavers to install and 1,200 square feet of finish work to run. If I want to round this time up to the nearest crew day, and I figure there's going to be a 3-man crew working an 8-hour day on this job, 3 times 8 is 24 hours. So I'm going to round up to the nearest full crew day, which is 24 hours. You don't have to do this. That's an option, but I'm going to do it here. And what that has done is now said it's going to take about 120 hours, man hours, to do this work. So I'll hit Update Estimate, and sure enough, that's where my 120 gets in. So once I've set up some production rate calculators, I can basically take a lot of intelligence and experience and history by my experienced estimators, have them build production rate calculators, and then I can have lesser experienced estimators use those calculations to arrive at this. Now, of course, in addition to these hours, I have to factor those things that we looked at before we started this. Site accessibility, safety, equipment availability, where we can store materials on site, how far the site is from our shop. All these things are going to impact that 120 hours, but I get a really good starting point for a less experienced estimator. Let's flash back now to our production rate calculators just to look at a couple other examples and how they might get used. So go back to my production rate calculator list. And I've got another one here that I wanted to show you called plant and shrub planting. Here, for example, my task names could be all the different sizes of plants that we might plant, or at least the most common ones. Over here is the units of measure, which in most cases is going to be each, but in some cases like annuals or ground cover might be flat. And then I've got the installation rate. So what this is saying is I can install 10 number 1 or 1 gallon plants per man hour, 8 number 2s, 3 number 10s, 4 flats of ground cover an hour. So again, once I've set up these production rates, estimating a planting bed or garden area becomes pretty simple. For the labor hours, when I use this production rate calculator on an estimate, I'm basically going to enter the quantity of each size of plant that we're going to install, and it'll calculate a labor factor for me. Really, a 5-gallon plant, no matter what kind it is, it's going to take about the same amount of time for your crews to plant. So we're going to just specify that here, 5-gallon plants, we can do 5 of them per man hour. Every time we're estimating now, and I use this calculator, I'm just going to put my count of each size plant, and it'll spit out for me a total labor hours. Snow plowing. So here I've got another one where I've got plowing lots with an 8-inch plow truck, plowing lots with a skid steer and 10-foot pusher, plowing lots with a 20-foot pusher and a loader. Each of these are measured in acres, and each of these installation rates tells me how many acres a man hour we can plow using these pieces of equipment. So again, if I was using this calculator on an estimate, I would have clicked the calculator button. Then I would have entered the acres for whatever equipment I'm using, or possibly both. If I'm going to send a plow truck and a loader, I could say the loader's got 6 acres to push and the plow truck's got 1.5 acres. And again, it's going to calculate labor hours for me very simply. So the production rate calculator is a super handy tool, and they certainly take a lot of the guesswork out of estimating for newer estimators, but there's even a more important tool. Production rate calculators are good, but they're simple. All they build is calculations for labor. That's all they're really good for. If you want to get into things like calculations for material quantities, then what you're going to really look at is work area templates. And let's pause right now, and we'll take a look at the work area template section of LMN and how you can set up templates that make estimating way faster. Now, the purpose of templates is threefold. One of the most important benefits of templates is that they're going to reduce mistakes. If, when we're estimating, we can present our estimators with a complete list of labor, equipment, and materials and subs that they need to think of when they're estimating the job, it's going to eliminate the risk of forgetting items a lot more significantly than I'm just leaving it up to my estimators to remember. So one of the biggest ways we can save costs and money with templates is by making sure that every estimator thinks about all the same variables when they're estimating work. Templates also help me standardize the way our estimators think of the job. So we can build, again, that complete list, but also come up with production rates for every single item in that list. So production rates for labor, just like a production rate calculator, but also production rates for materials. So for every 1,000 square feet, we're going to need X number of tons. And again, we can standardize the way estimators calculate our quantities. It will also help us estimate faster because in just a few steps, we can add all the items we need to think of, rip through those calculators to come up with our quantity takeoffs, and in 2 or 3 minutes, put together a reasonably accurate estimate. Again, we'd have to review it to go through some of those external factors. But let's take a look now at some actual templates and see how they work. Now you can access the work area template screen by going under the item catalog menu and clicking templates. And I've got a bunch of sample templates set up here. But let's start with a very simple template. We looked at how to use a production rate calculator for lawn mowing. I could also use a template. In my template, under the items, this is where you're going to list all the labor, equipment, and materials and subs that your crews need to think of, or your estimator needs to think about when estimating. Over here, we're going to add items. This is just going to pull items from your estimating catalog, your labor, equipment, material subs. So from your catalog, you're going to put all the items in here that your estimators need to think of when you're estimating a lawn. You can put some descriptions in here if you want. And then over here, you got your production rate. So I can click this and say, it takes us 0.15 hours to cut 10,000 square feet. And there's a very simple example of a template. Now this one, lawn mowing, It's almost easier with a production rate calculator versus a template. Template's a little bit of overkill because we don't have any materials, etc., that we need to calculate. A good example for the template, though, is the driveway. So we looked at our production rate calculator for the driveway, but that only, again, did the labor. If I'm going to go paver driveway here, and then I'm going to look at the items I've put in this template, what I've done here is not only add the labor, obviously like we would in a production rate calculator, but also the equipment needed. So I've got a skid steer and I've got a construction truck and trailer. I've got disposal bin in case we need to dispose. I have filter fabric, gravel, brick sand, edge restraint, polymeric sand, the paver with a qualifier here that I've got to pick the type of paver when I estimate, sealer, delivery fees. So I can make this list as long as I wanted. What's going to happen is when we're estimating, we're going to add this template to the estimate, and then all these items are going to come in automatically. So you're basically prompting your estimator. These are all the things you need to think about every time you estimate a driveway. And over here again, we can make a production rate calculator so that we're also saying, and this is how to calculate the quantity of these things. So again, eliminating some of the site-specific variables, we can really standardize the way our estimators estimate. So I've got my list of items, labor, equipment, materials, and subs. I got my production rates set up. You can also set up client notes. So the notes that are going to, it's going to pull these notes from our template into our estimate. So those are the notes that are going to show up on the client's proposal. And down here, I've also got crew notes. So I can set up notes for the crews that might include things like tool checklists and specifications and order of operations, even bullet point steps on how to build whatever it is you're estimating. Those will come out on the crew job planners, but they'll get automatically added to the estimate every time we use this, so my estimators don't have to. Let's take a look at this one in real life, see what it looks like. So I've got a blank patio here. We're going to go add work area. We're going to add a work area called a driveway. Again, I could specify these when I was doing an actual estimate, but we'll blow through that quickly. Now I've got the driveway, and if I'm a fairly new estimator and I don't have templates, I've got to go over here to add new items, and then I got to work my way through thinking about how to build this driveway. I got to need a crew, and then I'd go over and I would pick the equipment we're going to use and the materials, all good, and it's bringing in my costs and prices. But the problem is each different estimator in our company, if we had multiple, could be including or not including different things. Or the worst case scenario, we could just forget something because we're rushing through it and we've got a deadline, etc. So templates are going to eliminate those risks. I'm going to go up here to templates, and I'm going to pick that paver driveway. Now I've made an easy one and a hard one. My labor factor changes, and whether it's got lots of turns and cuts or whether it doesn't matter which one I'm going to use. They're both the same. They just have different factors. So I'll grab my easy one, and you can see here what it's done is automatically pulled in all the items that we need to think about. So I'm going to close this side panel now, and now I can just work my way through the estimate. So I'm going to click the calculator. I'm going to enter the square footage. It's going to tell me how many hours I should estimate. I'm going to work through my truck and trailer, my skid steer, my disposal bin. Maybe I need some, maybe I don't. If I don't need the disposal bin, I can take it out here, but at least I've had my estimator remember to think about it. So if I'm going to dispose 1,200 square feet of excavation, tells me I'm going to need 4 bins. I got filter fabric. I've got gravel. So again, I'm going to work my way through the production rates. Going down here, I've got brick sand. Now there's a calculator for every item. You can see most of the ones I've done so far were based on square feet. But when I get to edge restraint, this one's done in linear feet because edge restraint can't be calculated on square feet. So that's why every item has its own calculator, because the measurement could change. Can't do a driveway just all off square feet. Most of it can be, but not all of it. I'll work our way down. Now I've got a paver. Let's call it 1,250 square feet. We'll put a little bit of waste. And here's where I might enter the type of paver. Now I could also just delete that placeholder and add the actual paver from my catalog. So I could go over here, delete, and then add the actual one I'm going to use. Or I could just change the typing as long as I was really comfortable with the price we were paying. What I just did is probably faster. But if you wanted to go and delete that, it's just nice to have that placeholder in your template. That way, again, your estimator doesn't forget to think about it. Now let's assume we're not going to seal it. So I'm just going to delete the sealer. So it's gone. And then I got a delivery fee. So I got one delivery fee. It's going to cost us $250. And there we go. So now if I save it, I've got my estimate for my driveway. All my stuff is built. If I look over here in the client notes under the driveway, there's notes for our client's proposal. If I look in the crew notes under the driveway, there's notes for the crews. All our costs and prices came in here, and I'm ready to print my estimate. And it only took us about 60 seconds to build that driveway. So you can really reduce the time it takes to build an estimate and the variability from estimator to estimator. What it really does and really can assist you, and I think the way you can save the most money or add the most profit using templates with LMN is you're taking what a great or very experienced estimator would estimate, all the things that they think about and all the ways they calculate quantities, and you're sort of putting that up in a box so that all your estimators can share in that same knowledge without having to ask questions or have someone else review it. Again, if it's an inexperienced estimator, I'd certainly want them to review things like labor, time, and equipment, but 90% of this work is going to be done correctly. You can also use templates for things like snow plowing and for lawn mowing. We looked at the lawn mowing example. It's so simple. Templates might be a little bit of overkill for lawn mowing, but we could take a look, for example, at how to estimate how to plow a lot this way. I'm going to add service. I'm going to say snow plowing. So what I'm looking at now is a maintenance estimate. We're going to say it's done. We'll try to come up with a seasonal price for this job, for instance. So I'll go per season, and I'm going to say we're going to estimate that we're going to plow this lot 15 times. Now, there's lots of ways I can create templates on, if I wanted to get really precise with my estimate, I could create templates for 2 to 4 inch events and 4 to 6 inch events, 6 to 8, because obviously it's going to take different amounts of time. But just in this quick example here, we're going to keep it really simple. And I'm going to add a template for snow plowing, just called snow plowing average event. So it's just going to be our average time it takes in, small and large events. So I'll add that in. And again, all my labor, equipment, and materials flip over there. So you can see here I've got snow plowing labor, crew truck, salt, and bag salt. I'll work my way through the calculators. I'm going to measure the property, which you can do if you didn't watch 101. There's a measure site here. So right from my estimate, I can click this and measure the property. Once I've measured the property, I'm going to click the calculator here and I'm going to say this is 2.4 acres. And again, it'll work out, and that's going to take us 3 hours. So I know if the labor is 3 hours, my equipment's going to be 3 hours. I can just type that in, or I could also use the calculator. And then I got to calculate salt. So again, I'm going to put in my calculator there. It says I'm going to need 1.25 tons of that. And then I've got bag salt. So if it's going to take some time to put a little bit of salt down on the walks, I could put down that there's about 250 square foot of entranceway, and it's going to tell me I'm going to need 1/4 of a bag. And there we go. We've now created an estimate that tells us our price to plow this lot should be almost $500, $492. And our seasonal price, if we're going to go 15 times, we should charge the client $7,300. If I wanted to do this per visit, I'll just change that to per visit. And now I've got a price per visit. So that's an example of how to use templates and how templates can make estimating faster, easier, and more efficient. So let's look at production rate calculators and templates and how they can make things faster. There's one other thing you should know about, and can certainly help you on the service end, especially maintenance contract, that'll make things way faster. There is one handy tip you can gain from this in terms of making maintenance estimates a lot faster. And I think if you get a hold of this, you're really going to see your time estimating maintenance jobs decrease. All we need to really do is build a maintenance contract for a client. Maybe it's a small residential client, for instance. And we're going to do everything we possibly can to make this estimate as complete as possible. So really good notes, really good specifications, all the different services we might provide for that client. Really get this estimate tight and as perfect as we can get it. Once you're at that level, what you want to do is go down here and hit Save as New. When you're going to save it as new, you're going to change, so you're making a copy of that estimate that you've built. What I want you to do is then change the client information to yourself. So if you don't have yourself already, make a new client for your shop and then change the project name. So we're taking the copied version. We've assigned the copied version to ourselves as a client. And we're going to change the project name to Residential Maintenance Template Small. What I'm going to do now is every time I have to estimate a small residential maintenance job, I'm going to go to my service estimates and I'm going to do a search for template. Here's my residential maintenance template small. I've got a few of them from some other examples, but I'm going to open this one up. And this is going to be my starting point for my new residential template. So if this maintenance estimate is for the Jones residence, well, I'm starting from this template that I've already done a good job estimating. I've got good client notes for everything. I've got good crew notes for the things. I've basically started with an estimate that's 90% complete. All I'm really going to need to do here is tweak the labor times if they're required. But if I made a residential maintenance template small, even my labor times are going to be very close, just going to need a little bit of tweaking. So here we go. If I needed to estimate a job for the Jones, I'm going to go down here. I'm going to hit Save as New. And this time I'm going to put Jones Summer Maintenance. Over here, I'm going to change my lead. And I'm going to go to the Jones. Maybe I've already entered them as a lead. In this case, I'm going to assume I have. And I'll pick Bill Jones. So it puts his address in here. And then I'll hit OK. So now I've got the Bill Jones Maintenance. And all my stuff's already set up and in there. I've already got good notes, good things. All I'm going to do here is tweak. For example, if we had 2 hours for mowing a small, in this case it's small, probably 2 man hours, be 1 man hour of crews, but maybe that's a little bit. I could tweak this here, 1.8, or I could do 2.2 based on the site logistics at Bill Jones' house. But really, all I'm left to do here is just tweak. Maybe I got to fertilize, maybe he's got a little bit more turf, I got a little bit more fertilization, I should add a bit. But generally, if we've got a small residential template, a medium residential template, and a large residential template, your hours and quantities are going to be very, very close. And you've got 90% of your work done for you just by saving a really good estimate as a template and then starting all your new estimates from that template. So it's not a work area template exactly. It's simply an estimate with the name of template that you can use as a starting place for all estimates that fit that description. So if you created small, medium, and large residential maintenance template and a small, medium, and large commercial estimate, then what you'd have is 6 estimates that you could use, whichever one applied best to the job you were estimating as your starting point, and you'd have very little tweaking to do from that point forward. You may have to change specs, etc., but very little tweaking. So get in the habit of doing that for service companies where you might find templates are not as useful as they could be for construction because you don't have nearly the materials. Saving an estimate as a template and using that as your starting point save you a ton of time and mistakes estimating maintenance jobs. Now let's take a look at options and upsells and how we can use those and use some tools in estimating to make that easy. Let's go back now to our service estimate that we were just looking at. So here's the Jones. There is a column here called Hold, and Hold is great for options. So for example, if fertilizing was an option, if I turn fertilizing on hold, it's going to exclude that from the price. So right now, fertilizing's on hold. My total price of the job is $5,040. If I take fertilizing off hold, it's $5,438. So when I put it on hold, it basically removes that from the estimate, but it doesn't delete it, because that way I can put it back in or out really quickly. So if I'm negotiating with a client and I'm going through options here, you want the weeding, yes or no? It's super easy for me to turn weeding on or off as part of the contract. Now hold will do a couple of things. By putting it on hold, it'll take it out of the total, but it'll also exclude it from any printed reports as well. So if I'm printing an estimate for a client, a proposal, anything I've put on hold is not going to show up on the proposal either. So you can use the hold as well on construction estimates. Here, for example, I've got a driveway and I'm using an Il Campo paver and I've got a cost over here. Let's say though I wanted to make another option for the driveway using a different paver. What I could do here, instead of re-estimating the whole project, I've already got the time and the days and the square foot and all that calculated. I'm just going to go here and I'm going to say copy work area. So we're going to call this driveway and then premium, or maybe you'd call it with the different paver name. So now what it's done is create an exact replica of the driveway I've already quoted. What I'm going to go down in here is take out my paver, the other one. I'm going to go add items, and I'm going to add the other paver I was thinking about adding. So let's say I'm going to pick a more premium paver now. So we're going to pick a Copthorne paver, for instance. So I'll drop that in, get this out of the way. I'll set the quantity to 1,200. So all I've really done now is taken the same driveway I've already estimated and just now with a different paver. So for sure my paver is going to change, It may also have an impact on labor time if that other paver takes a little more or less time to install. It could impact my polymeric sand, but those adjustments aside, what I've done is very quickly created from my already estimated driveway, a second option called a premium driveway. I'm going to put that on hold. So now when we're at the client's kitchen table or wherever we're proposing the project, I've got two driveways here as part of their estimate. If you want the regular driveway, this project is going to come in about $20,100. If you like the upscale paver, we'll put the regular on hold and we'll take the premium off hold, and it's $23,000 with the premium. So again, using the hold button to help us turn things off and on. But what was really key here is copying a work area so that you can bring over 90% of your work and then just make tweaks for your other option. The other option that we should talk about, or upsell, we should talk about something like lighting. And sometimes you want to build a whole lighting package for somebody just like we would a regular estimate. But sometimes you just want to put a real fast sort of budget placeholder in here for lighting. So let's take a look at how we might do that. So for this particular upsell, I'm going to propose a lighting package, but I'm not really going to spend any time picking fixtures or that kind of thing. I'm just using this to feel the client out. So what I'm going to do here is go add work area, and I'm going to do something called lighting install. And we'll pick our cost code and we'll hit OK. Now, rather than spending time doing all the fixtures and calculating, so we're just sort of feeling a client out for an upsell or budget. I'm going to add a crew. I'm going to add equipment. And then on the material end, instead of going through and picking all my fixtures and wire and transformer or whatever, I'm going to go up here to new. So I'm going to go new, and under material name, I'm going to call it lighting material budget. So we're just going to create a budget line item. Over here, we're going to say, let's figure on using about $1,300 worth of lights and lighting material. And then down here, I'm going to set a custom profit margin to make sure I'm making the profit I want to make on lighting. And then I'm not going to save this to the catalog. I'm never going to use this again. I'm just going to add it to the estimate. So what I've done now is just very quickly added a lighting material budget at $1,300. Give me sort of $1,300 to play with when I'm buying lighting materials for this job. And if I put in my labor time, so if it takes two people a day to install this, we'll set it, say, 18 hours. We've got 9 hours a truck, and I've got a $1,300 lighting budget for materials. And what I've done here is just create a quick option now, small lighting package for this client, which I can put on hold. So it's not counted in my price. But if I wanted to, when I was sitting and negotiating, give them that option and take that off hold, put it on hold. We're going to take it in and out. Gives me that flexibility there, right on site to quickly add or subtract things from the estimate. And I didn't have to go through pick all the fixtures. Obviously, once I won this bid, especially if I proposed it to the client as a budget item, I could go through afterwards, remove that, and pick the actual transformers, fixtures, etc. Now let's take a look at some options for discounts and rounding. Now, discounts and rounding items up to the nearest dollar figure can be a little tricky when using LMN because it's so precise on estimating. It's built so much on actual prices. There's a couple ways to do these things. If I wanted to give the client a discount on the premium driveway, I've got a couple of ways of doing that. I could, change my cost or change the price for sure to lower my labor rate or lower my profit that I'm going to make on this labor. I could change a cost or price on materials. You can do any of that. But sometimes it's nice to just throw on the bottom line a minus $300 discount. If I didn't necessarily want to show that client that discount and I wanted to put it in the item, what I can do here is add an item, and I'm going to add a discount item and throw it in here. Or if I wanted to show the client the discount, which is probably more likely, I'm going to create a whole new work area. That way it's going to show up on the estimate as a line item saying discount. So I'll add a work area. I'm going to call it design credit discounts. A lot of companies say, hey, we're going to charge you X for the design, but if you take us for the construction, we'll credit you the design. So I'm going to put that right in there. And then I'm going to, I don't need any labor, equipment, and materials inside. I just need to add a discount. So before I do that, let me just show you how I set that up. I'm going to quickly open another tab and go into my item catalog and the other section. And in the other section, I've set up an item name called discount. So the other item called discount has a cost of 0, and a profit margin of 0. And the reason I use an other item is because other items don't have any overhead recovery. So there's no overhead recovery factored into this at all. So by using this discount item on an estimate, what I can do is go add items and templates. I'm back to my estimate now. Go to other, add a discount. Now the discount item comes in. What do I need to do for this discount? The cost of the discount, or the price of the discount, I'm going to say is minus 300. So if I'm going to give them a $300 discount, I'm going to go minus 300. And what that'll do is, I want to leave my cost at 0 because it's not actually costing me anything, but it does have a negative 300 impact on the price. So it's going to minus 300. And you're going to see here, and your price is going to also be minus 300. So I've more or less now added a discount. When I print this proposal for the client, this design credit discount is going to come out on the proposal as a line item. And that's it. That's all I have to do. Again, if I don't want to apply the discount, I can put it on hold and it comes out of my total price. But I'd assume you want your discount in there. The other way you can use an other item, if I go back there, is rounding factor. So I can also add a rounding factor in here. And again, I've done the same thing as I did with a discount. Unit cost is 0, profit margin is 0, no overhead recovery. So basically I'm working with strictly a dollar value that I can mess with. Let's say I'm here on a summer maintenance job. I've got mowing. Now, right now, my rowing price per visit is $103.12. Let's say I wanted to get to a nice even $100. Go over here to the left-hand side. We're going to say customize per visit price. And I'm going to say change it to a custom price of $100. So we go, okay, so it does that. In this case, it came out perfectly at $100. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes the quantity times the cost throws it off by change this unit price here by 3 cents or so. I'm going to get it. Now I got something that's at $99.98. And let's say I just want to charge an even. If you can manipulate your unit price or your quantity to make it perfectly round, great. That's the easiest way to do it. But again, sometimes just quantity times unit price doesn't come out to be a perfectly round number, especially if there's multiple items. So what we can do, add items again, go to other, go to rounding. I'm going to add my rounding factor to this estimate by clicking the plus button, get that out of the way again. And now I'm 2 cents off here. So what I need to do is go edit my unit price and set a custom unit price of 2 cents. So that's how to apply discounts and rounding to estimates. Let's take a look now at importing work from other work areas. This is another really handy tool you can use. What importing work will allow you to do is, let's say I've estimated something for another client in the past, and it's very similar to something I'm estimating now. What I can do is actually bring that work area in from another estimate into a current estimate. I'm making a copy of it, but I'll bring it in as a copy, and then I can make my tweaks from there. So let's see how this works. I'm going to jump now to an estimate. We'll open a Lee Wilson estimate here. We'll go to work areas. So this is the estimate we were working on before. We had a driveway, we had a premium driveway, we had a garden. Let's put one of these on hold so I don't have both in there. Let's say the Wilsons are interested in also having a pergola done. And it's a very similar design to a pergola I've already done in the past. What I can do is actually import that pergola from the other estimate without having to re-estimate it all again. Simply slide up here and go import. I'm going to search for the job I used it on in the past. I'm going to select that job. I'm going to import or choose to import the work area from that job that I want. So I can do multiple, but in this case, I just want to bring in the pergola. And then I'm going to click finish. Be sure to review all costs and prices if you are importing something, because you could have done some customized stuff on the other job. But I'll click finish and bang, I got my pergola in from the other job. It'll automatically take the costs and prices, apply this budget's overhead recovery and profit. And now I've got my pergola all built. I can go in here and start editing my labor, equipment, materials as necessary. So if it was going to take a little bit longer because of access or whatever, I'm going to do some changes there. But I built my pergola super fast without having to do it all from scratch. So the import button here will allow you to import anything. And it's available on service or standard estimates. Will allow you to import any work area from another estimate that you've already done, make it that much simpler to start and build that estimate for this one. Let's take a look now at some advanced features when it comes to changing pricing on a job. There's a few things we can look at as we get through here. The very first scenario we're going to present is this. Let's say you've done an estimate for somebody and you did it for them last year. I'm going to go in here to my premium driveway and I'm going to say, last year, let's say this paver option here, it's an Echo Optilock. Let's say we paid $2.67 for this paver, and polymeric sand was going for $21.50 a bag. So we'll assume this is last year and these are last year's prices. And at the time we bid this job last year, those were my costs. Now let's say this client comes back to us this year and says, hey, you know what? We'd really like to go ahead with that driveway. But let's assume it's like sort of 4 or 5 months later. What I want to do before I accept that estimate is make sure that I'm using the right costs from the vendors at today's prices, not 5 months ago prices. So what you can do is just slide up here and go refresh pricing. And by doing this, what it's going to do is say, hey, we're going to change all your costs and pricing to your current catalog settings. Are you sure? I'm going to say, okay. And what that'll do is rip through all the items in the estimate and update all the costs so that, oops, that's the wrong driveway. We use the premium. It'll update all the costs so that these are our current costs and prices from our catalog. Note that it's changed those things back from what I had edited them to what their current prices are. So the fastest way to sort of reprice an estimate based on vendor cost or our cost changes would be just go refresh pricing. There's other things that may have changed too. For example, if we did this budget last year or this estimate last year, perhaps I used a different budget. So what I want to do if I want to change the budget is go up here and change it here. So if I go edit, what I can do here is now change this budget to this New Year's budget. It'll automatically bring in the new overhead recovery calculators and everything. I have to accept the fact that it's going to change these things. So it will also change the price for the estimate. So make sure you're ready for that. And then I'm going to hit OK. And I'll basically reprice that whole estimate based on my new or this year's budget overhead recovery factor. So if I was going to take an estimate from last year and reprice it for this year, I'd probably do both those two steps. I'd A, assuming my budget has changed, pick my new budget. And then B, I'd go refresh my pricing and make sure I'm using all my current vendor costs and prices. If you go to refresh pricing and you see this little no smoking sign here, what it's basically saying is, hey, you've made some changes. I need you to save those changes before we do the refresh. So just save the changes. Now I can come down here and do the refresh. So that's how to automatically change both your unit costs and your budget. One other thing we can look at though for doing bulk changes is taxes. So if you use the edit taxes button, what this will allow you to actually do is change tax settings on a certain work area. Now we covered this in estimating 101, but it's important, so we'll just quickly cover it again. If in your area, certain types of work have different tax settings, what I can do is, for example, pick all the hardscape types of work and say for hardscape projects, we don't charge tax. So I'm going to set that all to exempt. So for all the hardscape line at work areas, no sales tax. So we hit OK. Now let's say for the softscape, the garden, we have to charge tax. So I'm going to pick the garden and I'm going to say the garden. Now again, it's up to you in your state whether you charge taxes on labor, equipment, or just the materials. But assuming everything was taxable, and it may not this way be, it might be just the materials. But if everything was taxable, I would do that. It's going to set that to the garden and I hit OK. So now I've again changed the prices based on tax settings. I could also do that if my tax rates changed. I could use that edit taxes button and change the tax rate for everything on that estimate in sort of one step. One of the last things we'll take a look at now then for changing pricing, set profit. So we can set a fixed profit. Now it's important to note this profit is going to change the profit on my entire estimate. So if you have different profit margins for driveway work and for garden work and whatever, you're probably not going to want to use this. If I use this one now and I say I want this whole estimate to be at 14% net, when I click OK, it's going to take every work area on my estimate here and reprice it to be at 14% net profit. So there's your really fast way of just updating an estimate's whole net profit. If I want to be a little more specific, let's say, for example, we know we can make more money on softscapes or more profit on softscapes. I'll go over here to the garden, click this down, I'm going to say override profit. And I say on the garden, I want to make a 25% net profit. And now it'll change just that garden. So there's the two ways to manipulate profit on the entire estimate, either here for the whole estimate or here if you want to do it work area by work area. The last example I want to go through here is about changing your overhead recovery factor. Now this is something you'd rarely use, so we saved it for last, but it's really important if you want to get into bigger jobs or get into estimating civic or prevailing wage type projects where your labor rates are going to go up. Now let's take a look now at a large job. Just a quick sample job here. We built a part. I've been really loose with this. I had labor equipment and a whole bunch of materials whacked together. So I built a very loose estimate, but it's enough to show you the concepts here. Let's say I'm estimating this job at our normal cost of labor and our normal overhead recovery, which in this case is 62% on labor. What I want to do here is assume that we're going to have to pay union wage on this job. So our cost of labor is going to go way up. But what happens in those cases is if your cost of labor goes way up and you have an overhead recovery factor of a certain percentage, what's going to happen is my overhead recovery is going to also go way up if my cost of labor goes up. But in reality, when we're working on a prevailing wage job, yeah, my cost of wages go up, but my overhead stays the same. So what I can actually do is in scenarios where your labor goes way up, you can and should reduce your overhead recovery percentage if you're using a percentage method, because you don't quite need the same percentage to recover the same amount of overhead because you're paying a higher rate. Let's take a look at how that works first. We've got a unit cost here at $24.95. Let's keep things really simple and just make a nice clean $25 an hour as our cost on labor. My markup, let's assume, and again, I'm just going to make these numbers nice and clean so we can see. Let's say our labor factor is 70%. So I've got a labor cost of $25 an hour. Don't forget that includes downtime and overtime and those kind of things. I got $25 an hour of labor cost, and I've got a 70% overhead recovery on labor. If I'm going to go to the analysis tab here and look at how much overhead we're recovering, it's about $15,600 of overhead recovery. Now let's take a look at what would happen if I go into work areas and prices. Let's say we had to pay union rates on this job. And after our burden and downtime and everything with the union rates, we're up to $36 an hour of cost. So I've upped my cost. Now in reality, our cost of labor has increased, but our overhead hasn't increased. If I go to analysis right now though, instead of recovering $15,500 or $600 worth of overhead, I'm now counting $19,500. I'm recovering a lot more overhead. Why? Because your labor cost has gone up and your overhead recovery is a percentage of labor. However, if this job was a residential job where we didn't need to pay union, we would be recovering a lot less overhead. And my overhead hasn't really changed. Whether it's a civic job or a residential job, it doesn't change my overhead. So I don't really need the same overhead recovery factor when we're bidding prevailing wage jobs. In fact, I don't want it because it's going to probably lead to you losing the bid, just being not competitive on price. So what I want to do is figure out how I can recover the same overhead. Let's just drop that for a second back. So it's $25 an hour again for labor. How can I recover $15,600 worth of overhead? Because that's all I need to recover on this job at prevailing wage rates. So here's how you might figure this out. Right now, we've got an overhead recovery of $25 an hour and an overhead recovery factor of 70%. Pull out your calculator and do $25 an hour times 70%. What that's telling you is we're recovering $17.50 of overhead recovered per hour in our normal budget. Now, when I pay my crew more, my overhead hasn't changed. I still really only need to recover $17.50 of overhead to hit our budget. Assuming you haven't billed all kinds of prevailing wage in your budget. If you have, then this doesn't apply. But assuming I don't have much prevailing wage in my budget, then what I'm going to do here is figure out what percentage $17.50, that's the amount of overhead I need to recover, is of my new cost of labor, which is $36. So we're just going to do $17.50 divided by $36 is 48.6%. So what I'm going to do here is lower my overhead recovery factor. Now let's take a look at this right now. I've upped my labor to 36%. Now I'm back to $19,000 worth of overhead. Too much overhead. I only need $15,600. So I'm going to go back to my work areas. I'm going to change my overhead recovery factor. Remember, our calculator told us that $15.70 that we recover of overhead is 48.6% of our new prevailing wage rate. So I'm going to drop my labor factor just on this estimate. It doesn't change your budget. It does it on just this estimate to 48.6%. I'm going to click OK. So I've increased my cost of labor, but I've decreased my overhead. If I go back to my analysis tab, there we are again, right back to that 15,673, the number that we that's all we need to be at. Again, assuming you haven't built all kinds of prevailing wage into your budget. So what I've done there is manipulated my overhead recovery factors to help maintain my competitiveness on a prevailing wage. That draws us to about the end of this advanced estimating webinar. If you had any questions about the content in this webinar, or you have any questions about LMN and its estimating and mobile timekeeping products, the email and website addresses on the screen are support@golmn.com or www.golmn.com. We'd love to hear from you. And if you have any questions that's holding you up or slowing you down when you're estimating, be sure to reach out to us, even on live chat. It's right there on the top of your screen. Hit them up, ask your questions. We love to help make your estimating faster and more profitable and to give you advantage over your competition and non-LMN users. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next webinar.